Ladies and gentlemen, it's so lovely to see you. Thank you for coming out on a cold winter's night. Those of us who stood on the bridge a bit earlier will realise it's definitely got colder. I'm the relatively new Bishop of Lewes. My name's Will Hazelwood. So it's very lovely to be in Lewes and very lovely to be with real people in real time, all in the same space. But I'm not the only one who's new here. As many of you may well know, we've got two new priests working across Lewes, and they're even shinier and more new than me. So I'm just going to very briefly introduce you to Ben and Anita, the two new, well, are you both rectors, or the two new rectors of Lewes? Give them a round of applause.
Yes, so I'm rector of St Anne's, which is the High Street, St Michael's, which is a little down the High Street, and St Thomas's, which is connected to this hall and is just over there. And it's really wonderful to be here today. And just to say that the churches are very much there for all of you. Do make use of them. They're there to support you in whatever way. And so come and talk, and we'll be delighted to support you. Thank you.
Oh, and I'm delighted to welcome you as well. I'm Anita Colquhoun, Rector of Trinity of Lewes, which covers three of the churches: South Over, St John's of Castro and South Malling. I've only been here just over 3 months. Ben beat me here by about 6 weeks. But really enjoying Lewes and so much looking forward to working with you all, getting to know you in your different part that you play in the community. And so it's great to have this event so soon into being here. But you probably don't want to hear much from Ben or myself. But I'm delighted to welcome and introduce Archbishop of Canterbury, Justin Welby. It's great for you to be touring Chichester Diocese and to be able to spend a bit of time with us here in Lewes. So let me hand over to you.
Lewes has some strange memories for me, because I was at boarding school from the age of 8 in Seaford, and two things happened in Lewes. One was I changed trains from Victoria on the school train at the beginning of every boarding school term. A school train, because all the schools in Seaford, and there were lots in those days, we are talking well over half a century ago. A lot of the schools in those days all started their terms on the same day, and so you had these special trains full of children crying with homesickness and dislike of the idea of going back to school. And it was always Seaford changed at Lewes, and we all changed trains at Lewes, and that was when you really felt that the term had begun. Of course, coming back the other way, Lewes was a much nicer place. But the other thing is that on the rare occasions, gosh, it does sound a long time ago, or a different world, that you weren't allowed to see your parents for the first 3 weeks or the last 3 weeks of term, and between times you could see them twice. Great. And the big treat, when I say see, you didn't get away for a day, for a weekend or anything. You had about 4 hours in the afternoon. And so one of the big treats was coming up to Lewes rather than going to some other town. I better not say, because otherwise I'll get into trouble. And with that time. I just remember coming here, and it's such a lovely place to come. So it's a treat to be here this evening, and thank you. And it will doubtless redeem some of the bad memories of sitting in a train corridor trying to pretend I wasn't crying. And it's also I'd like to add my thanks to those who talk about coming out on a cold night, to Bishop Will talking about coming out on a cold night. One of the things that Lewes is almost the classic example of a stable town that has been here for century after century, that almost epitomises the idea of what a town in a rural county like Sussex, the traditional Sussex, is going to be. It's solid, it's there, it's always been there, it always will be there, and it's very remarkable. And yet, it, like the rest of our country, is facing enormous challenges at the moment, I'm sure. And for those of you who are linked to the council, you'll be very aware of this. But there are challenges that are coming with the vast changes in society we're facing. I've talked already in other places today, and some people may have heard this, so I won't try not to bore you, but the enormous changes in genetics. There was someone on the bridge at the vigil a bit earlier who, gosh, he must be in his late 80s, I didn't ask him his age, but working it out, who was at Pembroke College, Cambridge, and had and worked as a research scientist under Crick, who discovered DNA. And he worked with another scientist, I'm not a scientist, so I can't remember, with the scientist who developed mRNA, which is part of that process. It was the discovery of mRNA all those years ago, and then the faster ways through technology of decoding DNA and mRNA, which meant that we got the vaccine in a year rather than 10. So, if that work hadn't been done then, that was 60 years ago. The human genome was decoded in round about the turn of this century, millennium. And today, they can decode DNA through electronic analysis and computers in hours, doing what even less than 20 years ago would have taken months or years. And they can produce a vaccine in a year rather than a decade, and be very sure that it will be safe. That is nothing in comparison to what will come over the next 20, 30, 40 years. At the same time, technology will change hugely. And the impact on a place like this, I suggest, there's possible impacts, who knows what the future will bring, but there are possible, really extraordinary impacts. It could be very good, could be very bad. People will, post-COVID, we're already seeing large numbers of people moving out of the cities across Europe. Not because they're frightened of being in cities, but because with information technology and the advent of video links, people can work from home much more than we ever imagined. I know the head of Facebook in London, who covers Europe, Middle East, Africa, and she said, or she's just said now, the last head, and she said, you know, just before COVID began, we had a 10-year plan and forecast of what would happen with information technology. We got it right in terms of direction, but it took 6 months, not 10 years. So we've suddenly jumped a decade. It's what happens in war, doesn't it? And in a great human crisis, suddenly everything changes here. It's really extraordinary. That means demographically, people will look at a place like Lewes. I did it earlier. There's compulsory retirement for archbishops. You'll be deeply relieved to know. It's not in the next 10 minutes, so it won't be before the end of my talk, so you'll be maybe less relieved by that. But I have to go on my 70th birthday. Before. I'm allowed to go before, but I must go on my 70th birthday. And so that's tomorrow, that's 3 years and 10 months, but who's counting? Alternatively, you could say 46 months or...
How many days?
Approximately 1,420.
But who's counting?
I am genuinely not counting, but my CD career in the oil industry and in the financial market means I can calculate days gap very quickly, because that's how you measure interest rates. But I'm not going to go down that. But those changes, people moving to places like this, will have benefits and costs.
Yes.
The costs will be in larger population, new people moving in, people who aren't used to living in a place like this and don't know how to. The benefit will be in terms of rural schools suddenly getting more people coming to them and therefore being viable in a way that even 3 years ago we were thinking, oh, in the church, because so many of our schools are rural, we're going to lose so many of them over the next few years. Actually, I think that's not nearly as obvious as it was. I'm really glad about that. It means villages where the demographic has changed dramatically may change back quite well. We lived in France for a number of years. We still have a house there. French property prices don't move. The house we have is worth, in nominal sums, almost exactly the same as we paid for it in 1992. Those who have an English house just gloat for a minute. But for the first time in 30 years, property prices are beginning to move, and new families are moving into the village where we go. We're both French speakers, we know people around there very well. And they're all saying this is extraordinary, it's wonderful, we're getting new people. And that's because they can work from there instead of having to live in Paris. The same will happen here, only more so. How do we keep and build communities? Because communities actually don't make themselves. Historically, communities have been built by the church. The church buildings themselves have been, for many rural areas, and to this day, have been the centre where people go to be. And in many villages nowadays, once you get rid of the pews, which mostly, not all of them, I'm not going to say all of them are like this, but in many churches, such as the one where I was a rector of a rural parish, the pews are Victorian tat, bought second hand 150 years ago, pitch pine, with odd numbers at the end because they were a job lot from about half a dozen churches that had chucked them out. Nothing ever changes. And we got rid of them, and all the people who opposed it suddenly said, gosh, this is a beautiful church. Because it hadn't got wood up to here, right across the church. And then people said, oh, Justin, we can use this for the community. And I gritted my teeth rather and said, wow, what a good idea! I'd never thought of that! Crossing my fingers firmly behind my back. But the church has been one of the centres of community throughout history. Why is it still able to be today? I'm going to ask Father Andrew, who is a priest here, has been working with us over this weekend, but has been is priest up in Stoke-on-Trent. Just thanks.
So yes, I'm team rector of 3 churches in Stoke-on-Trent. I don't know how familiar any of you are with Stoke-on-Trent, but Stoke as a city is relatively new. It's only just over 100 years old. Prior to that, it was actually 6 independent towns. And none of them would ever speak to one another. And if you grew up in Fenton or Longton, you would not speak to somebody who came from Burslem. And that's all to do with pottery industry. Because each town, and almost each family, had its own particular way of decorating or firing pots, and you would take secrets. That wasn't allowed. Couldn't take secrets. So if you married somebody from another town, you were basically cast out. And there are still some people from my end of Stoke who have never travelled to the southern end of Stoke or the 6 miles away. So community in Stoke has been a very strange thing, because you have very close-knit family units scattered throughout the city, but in a broader sense it has been very disparate. The church, as Archbishop Justin says, has been the place where people are brought together. It's a city that has been hugely affected by the advancements in technology, the changes in economics. You know, there was a time when every dinner plate in the country, you turned it over and it had a mark of Stoke-on-Trent on the bottom. Now it's IKEA or somewhere in the Far East. And as an honorary Stokey, believe me, I do still turn the plates over. But trying to build community is what we are doing when you have generations of people who are disaffected, perhaps poorly educated, or even several generations within a family now who are unemployed. There are low levels of aspiration, there are low levels of engagement. And so finding a place where you are unconditionally valued, where it doesn't matter what your level of education is, it doesn't matter whether you have a job, it doesn't matter how you contribute to society, but you are loved and you are held, is all important. And that is what the churches have got going for them. Because actually, despite what people may think, we're not asking people for their money all the time. We're not asking for them necessarily to keep the roof up. But we are asking them to engage and to respond to the love of God. So what we do in our church is particularly, as we are forming a new team, our team ministry formed in lockdown, which was great help in many ways, because it meant we could do things gradually. But it was about invitation, about welcome. In some places, doing those things that are stereotypically Church of England, tea and cake, extending hospitality. And I know that seems strange, trite, cliche, but it's what works. Because actually, in an age where we are on Zoom, day in, day out, real human interaction, real human connection is so vital. And we continue to provide that support in the face of massive changes, as Archbishop Justin has said. And so where we build community is by being that physical, incarnational presence and reminding people that they are still loved, still wanted, and still welcomed.
Thank you very much. Just picking up on that, so what is the relevance and importance of the church today? In the 18th century, when Gibbon wrote his Over the Decline and Fall of the Roman Empire, sorry, this is going to sound very geekish, but I do like the book. It's a very long book, about 6 volumes. But in volume 1, on page 26 of the introduction, I didn't cough. On page 26 of the introduction, Gibbon says this about religion. He says, the various religions of the Roman Empire were to the peoples all equally true, to the philosophers all equally false, to the magistrates, that is the rulers, the governors, the councillors, to the magistrates all equally useful. In other words, religion kept people quiet. It was the echo of the people in Marxist terms. But that's not what we're talking about. It's not what Andrew's talking about. What we're talking about is that a good church lives out what the Bible says about who people are. And in Paul's epistle to the Colossians, chapter 3, verse 11, he says, in Christ, there is neither Jew nor Greek, slave nor free, male nor female, Scythian nor barbarian, but all are one. In other words, the very nature of what it is to belong to one another in community is based in our tradition in our folklore, in our culture, which is so influenced by Christianity, as Tom Holland shows in his book, Dominion. All of those is based in the idea that each person is of equal value in the sight of God, whoever or whatever they are. So how do we build and maintain community in a time of change and struggle, where the opportunities could be for ever greater inequality and the fewer people to become incredibly rich at the cost of the many? How do we do that? A society that forgets, and that means individuals who forget, that Jesus Christ reaches out to every single person, will lose its sense of community, as we're seeing in much of Europe at the moment, will lose its sense of coherence, will lose its sense of the common good, will lose its sense of vision and purpose, because it has nothing that says that the person sleeping rough in Brighton tonight in the cold is as important as the Archbishop of Canterbury, or the Prime Minister, or the richest man or woman in the land, and that their death is an equal tragedy, and a society that does not protect them. This is not politics, this is theology. The society that does not protect them is failing to be a truly human society. How will Lewes retain its beauty, its solidity, its stability? It can only do it when it is embedded in a greater and deeper truth than simply looking after itself, each person looking after themselves. It will find it when Christ is at the centre. Thank you.
It's your opportunity to kind of quiz the Archbishop. So I see that with a smile on my face because it's not me. But it's an opportunity to ask any questions you like. You are all part of this community. You're all involved in it. You all support it. You all encourage it. You are the community of Lewes. And as a newbie, I'm already delighting in Lewes. I kind of love it. I live near Upfield, but I kind of quite like Lewes. On a day off, it's a fantastic place to be, from the fishmonger to all the little independent shops to the cafes. It's a lovely place to be. But I'm also very aware that it's a very mixed place to be. The growing and very positive green movement that I've seen, the passion that people have about green issues and the environment. The sort of slightly interesting bonfire stuff, and I haven't really got my head around that at all as yet. The areas, the pockets of kind of poverty hidden within this. So, you all know this much, much better than me. And now we've got kind of a little bit of time for some questions to the Archbishop. So don't feel shy.
Yes. Thank you. My name is Councillor Ban. Thank you so much for coming here and to be among us. We value your visit. What I'm going to ask is, within your time that you've been an Archbishop or maybe a priest, and putting communities together, what has worked? What hasn't worked? And how will the church going forward will do to keep communities together?
I think I would say that both in this country and around the world, what doesn't work is top down. You all know a community doesn't really do the trick. Here is a framework and a common vision and purpose within which you can safely get to know each other. Does work. And the Church of England at its best over the centuries has been very good at that, in saying we are a place of safe meeting. Now, at its worst, which has happened quite a lot, it's been very, very bad at it indeed. In the 19th century, in the Great Reform, the year of the Great Reform Act, 1832, every single bishop in the House of Lords voted against the Great Reform Bill. And they were so hated that a number of bishops' palaces were burned, stormed, and the Archbishop of Canterbury was in Maidstone, and the rioting crowd that was opposing him going through, someone threw a dead cat into his carriage, and it hit his chaplain, who said, "Your Grace, someone has thrown a dead cat in," to which the Archbishop replied, "Be thankful it's not alive." But the church has behaved very badly at times, but at its best, it's been the place of safety, And I think that has been one of the key things in enabling unique places of safe meeting, of safe space, for people to form the relationships which begin to knit together the framework of community. This summer, the Platinum Jubilee gives us enormous opportunities. On the 3rd of June, street parties, the big lunch, big street parties all over the place, saying to people, do something with people you don't know, street party, nice and safe. It's just a couple of hours, you do it together, you suddenly find it's not so bad, and it begins to knit together the community. You can't do it that way, you've got to do it that way. So,
I'm also town councillor. You mentioned technology and how it was changing communities, or at least the way that people work. I'm just wondering, I sort of see technology as also being a two-edged sword, because it also threatens communities in the sense that we have large multinational companies who are coming along, they're offering to deliver groceries in 20 minutes, they are running taxi services, they are doing all sorts of things that previously communities did for themselves or did locally. How do you see that? How can one, if you like, retain community spirit, people working together for each other in the face of that sort of new technology?
I think both at a national and local level, I would suggest we mustn't roll over. It sometimes feels as though their force is absolutely overwhelming of the major technology companies using up-to-date technology. But what are the values that they represent? Is it simply that things are a bit cheaper? And at whose price are they a bit cheaper? In London, Uber drivers do not earn much, and until recent court decision, had no paid holidays, no sick leave, no security to employment at all. It was just like the old docks in Liverpool. If you didn't turn up on the day and someone didn't hire you, you didn't feed your family. I was Dean of London Cathedral in Liverpool, and 40 years, 50 years after that scheme had ended, that process had ended, it's no more than that, 80 years. There's still a folk memory of the injustice that there was there. But we managed to change all these things in the past, because there was a sense, particularly in the 40s, 50s, 60s, that human dignity demanded more than that. That's why I say, what is the internal value? What is the underlying value? For instance, in France, the baguette cannot be sold at less than a price. Now, I'm not in favour of everything French, just don't worry. But in France, the baguette, the long stick of bread, can't be sold under a certain price. Why not? So that local bakeries will always have a guaranteed margin on their baguette that they make on site and sell. If we went to the supermarkets, it would drop. They'd all be out of business in 6 months, as we know, as has happened here. That's a decision to say that the existence of local shops is more important than the profitability of big supermarket chains or 20 centimes on the baguette. So I think at local government level, I think it's a real challenge because these are big organisations and it's easily got wrong. But there is a question about what you say is appropriate and what isn't appropriate in planning terms, and not in a NIMBY way, but in a way that says what are the great values we are seeking to preserve in this town, in this council, and let's test the proposals coming against them. In the same way as you do on a planning inquiry, someone comes in and says they want to build a pre-block house painted bright orange and green stripes. You don't always give it planning permission because it just ruins the whole look of the place. And some people might say, well, that's bureaucracy, and others might say, thank heavens we've got someone who keeps an eye on it. So I think it does need that courage to say we're not powerless in the face of these things. We've got bigger and better aims, and again that comes back to the kind of thing the churches talk
Hi, I'm Wendy Maples and I'm a town councillor.
and county. Wait, a town and county.
And county, yes.
And which county is that? East
So
Sussex.
it's East Sussex.
It is that.
Yes, so Lewes division is my division within the county. Priory is my division within Lewes town. Along with many people here. So one of the things I just wanted to ask you, if you might tease out a little bit, is the distinction between communities of interest and geographical communities.
Oh, thank you.
One of the things that I think is interesting about the church and about community buildings like this one is how they point out the importance of geography for supporting community and proximity for being an important aspect of supporting community in the ways that communities of interest, much as I laud them and enjoy them myself, don't do and don't draw people out of their houses and don't get people talking to each other in the street. So there is a kind of infrastructure thing which you were pointing to a moment ago that's quite important to that. But anyway, so yes, I wondered if you could reflect a bit more on the distinction between the two.
I think it's a really fascinating and helpful question. My instinct on that is it's a both and rather than either or. Communities of interest, great. Everything from we have one of our children has dyspraxia. So obviously we go on and join up with communities of parents who have children with dyspraxia. Now, we could never have done that in the past. We go online and it's really up-to-date information about this development and that development. Magic. It's wonderful. We can improve how we can encourage her and help her in a way that a generation back was inconceivable. But on Wednesday, an old friend of mine, well, 3 weeks ago, an old friend of mine I've known 40 years, 3 weeks ago he was very healthy. 19 days ago, something happened in the brain, not a stroke, but it looked a bit like it. And he will die in the next couple of days, 68. And I went to the hospital to visit him on Wednesday afternoon. And he's paralysed, he can't speak. He's in intensive care, so tubes everywhere. Though they've been removed now. And I sat by his bed and talked to him a bit and put my hand on his arm. And just sat there and prayed for him for a long time. Just holding his arm quietly. No online community can do that. Local communities of locality, are the places where the person can put an arm around you, where the person can bring you a cake or a casserole, because anything from your dog's just died to you've been bereaved, or you've got married, or you've had a baby, and they can bring some food around. That doesn't work in communities of interest in the same way. So geographical location communities are really important. The other thing about location communities, unless you go in for gated communities and very selective stratified communities, which are essentially physical communities of interest, the interest being around wealth. Locality communities enable diversity, which means people's views and ideas are challenged and can therefore grow. As we all know, the big problem with communities of interest is that they feed their own prejudices.
Could I build on that, Archbishop? And I just written down here, how can we overcome the growing lack of community interest between the increasingly rich and the increasingly poor, as the social inequality rate in our communities, including in Lewes, by the way. Less people think that Lewes is a wealthy town. It's not. Average household income is something like £23,000 a year. You go to Landport, you go to Morning. Let's go and talk to some of those people about their lives and how they're living, the homes they're living in. How do we overcome that? What's the church's response to that, which is becoming an increasingly important issue as our society fragments?
I think there are two responses from within the church. One is the sort of basically theological response when the church is doing its job, which is to say you're equally valuable. But the other one is to go to the Epistle of St. James, where James says rather acerbically, do not say to people, be blessed, be well, and then go on your way. Show me your deeds and I'll believe your faith, he says. And I think the second part that I see in the church, which there are many things in the church which I'm ashamed about, but there are many things which at the institutional church, many things I absolutely rejoice in. One of those is 33,000 different social projects that the Church of England is a partner or participant in across this country at this moment. Might be more than that. And there'll be everything from people being able to go in and say to someone, I don't know what to do, I can't pay my debt. And so many churches now say, oh, actually, we can point you to someone, or we run the Care Centre, which will sit down without judgment and help you and give you good, and people who are trained in debt counselling. Others will, the night shelters, which will be operating tonight, to get people out of the cold. The food banks to help people. Wearing marvellous words of someone in Dover some years ago, when I was quite early on when I was Archbishop. It struck me as almost the motto of the food banks. And I don't like even needing food banks, by the way. They shouldn't exist, but they do because they're needed. And someone said to me, the trouble is, the month is just a little longer than the pay. I thought that just summed it up. And someone nowadays on 23,000 sounds a bit of money, but with the increase in heating bills, the month is going to be longer than the pay.
Not when the house prices are 11 and 12 times as much as the average.
Well, that also is the case. And so the church is very involved in all those things. And almost all the churches I know, I've never come across one that doesn't, does that because the one condition is you have to be a member of the human race, and then they'll help you. And as long as you're a signed-up member of the human race, and actually probably dogs and cats and being English, you'll do it. So this morning we went to, what's the name of the church?
St. Peter's.
St. Peter's, the other one.
All Saints.
All Saints.
All Saints Home.
All Saints Home. Big Victorian church on the outside. And I walked in expecting what you normally find in big Victorian churches. It's going to be a bit cold and it's going to be a bit sort of sparse. It was heaving with people of all nationalities and all faiths and no faith. And that is with money from Central Funds Church of England, 7-figure sum. They are doing a massive project of working with refugees. No conditions at all. And I just wander around happy as lark, thinking, this is the church I dream of. This is real church, and St. Peter's in Brighton was wonderful as well. This just feels the real deal. If Jesus was incarnate today, he is alive today, but if he was incarnate today, he'd wander in there and think, oh yeah, that worked. That's the real thing. That's what I wanted. Quite a few where he wouldn't do that. Am I right? But that's what the children are used
I just want to say that 2 years ago, All Saints, where I was working with the children's group, had a very small congregation, average age 80, and Father Ryan has absolutely created an amazing thing with his cafe, and because they have 2 hotels that have a lot of refugees in them, and he's transformed it with Angus. I think Father Angus is still there as well.
Yeah.
Just moved on.
Oh, he's just moved
Just
on.
moved
He's
on.
just moved
Well,
on.
we lost him to West Sussex, which is a great loss for me.
And my church is St. Peter's, which is just.
I mean, St. Peter's was St. Peter's Brighton
Yeah.
was literally falling down.
Yeah.
Absolutely well. 20 years ago? 15. How long has
15.
Archie been there?
2009.
Yeah.
Oh gosh, 13. And they went in, church plant, went in, and now, what's the, I don't know, a couple of thousand people, 1,500?
Yeah, 1,500, yeah.
1,500. And big church, full churches, not big churches, full churches don't fall down.
And
So it's rebuilt and serving the community.
Referring to technology, I've lived in Spain for many years, and community is all about touching, hugging,
Yeah.
being there for people. A mobile phone, you can text as much as you like, but you're not in front of somebody, sharing a problem, or putting your hand on their shoulder and crying. And that is what we badly need, so badly need to have back.
But you need both, don't you?
Both, yeah, both.
Yeah.
human
No, I think
contact
you're
is
right. I think so.
very, very
And technology can be a huge help, but it's not a substitute.
Yes.
I'm Hegel, so I'm a town councillor. I'm also one of the people who just organised the Big Bridge, so I'd like to thank you ever so much for coming and giving us your time. It was so much appreciated by the organisers.
And honestly, it's the other way around. It was a privilege to be invited. I was very grateful to be there.
We were so grateful we were able to do it. So my question is really a follow-on from what other people said, but it's around ethics and business. So I think one of the reasons why we've gone astray is that the rewards at the top are huge, and the rewards at the bottom are too small. And there was a tradition in this town, for example, there was a number of very successful Victorian businesses like run by the Baxters and the Avery's. One of the things they felt in terms of making money was there was a philanthropic Christian ethic in terms of giving back to that community through good works and through foundations and through money, which with loss of faith we no longer see. And I've just recently finished a role as a senior manager in a German business, where the minimum salary we paid for our employees was €4,000, which compares with the gentleman there's point about what is the average salary in Lewes. So in other countries, there is a way of looking at these ethics, the ethical balance differently. So I was just interested in your views, given that you were an executive in BP and you had roles in business.
Not BP. No,
It was
a company called Enterprise Oil, which has since been taken over after that.
you worked sort of within.
Yeah, I work within that malicious and vicious area.
Yes.
Of the oil
So
industry.
you've got. So I was just interested in your views about that. My views that business needs to be more ethical, and what were your views on how business could be more ethical and their role in actually sharing the benefits more widely within the community.
In the 1980s, which weren't seen as a great period, but average earnings for chief executives of top 100 companies were something like 25 times what the average earnings of the lower grade employees got. Today they're around about 140 times. And there was a doctrine that is now totally discredited by an interesting American economist called Milton Friedman, who said at one point, the business is business is business. Any involvement in anything beyond what is legally required is theft from the shareholders. And that, well, very rubbish. I mean, you don't have to say it and you think, good gracious. He was also behind monetary school, Chicago school, but I won't go into all that. I'm a geek on economics. But I agree with you, but it can be changed. That's interesting. I was really quite depressed about it a few years ago. And there's the Church of England does have a lot of money in the Church Commissioners, which started with Queen Anne in 1705, something like that, 6. And over the years, other stuff's come in, and it now has the Church Commissioners net of the pension fund has about £7,000 million, which is endowment. It's not allowed to distribute that. It's a crown established by the statute. But it is giving a lot more money away, a huge amount. It gives away about 500 million a year to the work of the church, which is what legally it has to do. However, a few years ago, over the last 10 years, they have developed towards networking. It's not a huge amount of money in international financial terms. In fact, it's minuscule. And a guy called Adam Matthews at the Church of England has networked together with other companies, started in the mining industry, then the oil industry, and it's now expanded right across the investable, what they call the investable universe, shares quoted around the world. He has put together a network of investment managers who between them manage $30 trillion. 30 trillion is 30 followed by 12 zeros, if my memory serves me. And that is, every company in the world will sit up and pay attention. And what that network is doing is systematically voting against companies that don't take climate change, the boards of companies don't take climate change seriously, that oppress their workers, that do business with evil regimes, and so on and so forth. The ethical side. And Adam is brilliant. He's absolutely brilliant. But the interesting thing, as he says, was, with numerous exceptions, but in the main, he found he was pushing on an open door. He didn't need to threaten them. That business executives are human beings, surprisingly, everyone doesn't always believe it, but they genuinely are. And they don't want to wake up in the morning and as they're getting dressed, look in the mirror and think, you are an absolute horrible person because of the business you run. They want to feel, and particularly when they retire, and they think, I want to feel I've done something useful with my life. Not everyone. Bad people. There's bad people. So it is changing, and actually we've been surprised at how easy it is to change most of them. Some of them being really tough. Some of them we disinvest from. Glencore would be a mining company would be a particular example. But with most of them, we found that when you speak to their humanity and you give them a framework of ethics, they buy into it. And the individuals, I suppose it's benefits for my sins, in the oil industry, I'm not quite serious about that. I've remained ethical advisor to the Association of Corporate Treasurers, which is a professional association of people who run money in companies around the world, or in the UK, and it's many companies. I had an email yesterday from a corporate treasurer who said, I'm really stuck as to what to do because my company is seeking to continue to work with Moscow because it sees huge profit there. And I think this is wrong. And what should I do? Because if I'm going to argue about this, I'm going to lose my job. And I've written back today, and it's useful for me in the oil industry because I can say, I'm not, this is something I understand, and said, you better shift jobs. And what was interesting is he wrote, concerned about it. He wasn't a flinty-hearted sort of, Mr. Gradgrind. He actually feels it. And I think that's true in many cases. So I'm quite encouraged about it.
Last question. Hello. I work for Family Support Work, which is the diocese and charity. So we work all across the diocese of Chichester with families in need for whatever reason, and a lot of our work takes place in church buildings or community buildings like this. But what we are noticing more and more, and this is sort of going back to the question of physical communities versus online or community interest, a number of the families that we work with, quite a lot not far from here, in the outlying villages, are incredibly isolated. They're plonked there because it's social housing and it's the only place that they can go. They can't afford cars, they can't afford internet, and they're incredibly isolated. What can the community do to help them? We're doing the best with our staff to go visit them and take them out, but as a community, what more do you think, or how can we help these people who are so incredibly isolated?
Advocacy and action. Advocacy about the need for some bus services and that kind of thing. Action in terms of, to the extent it is doable, we have the resources to do it, enabling people to get together and get to a place, a minibus or something like that, for some of these families. Bishop, perhaps, I didn't catch your name.
I didn't tell you. My name's Nikki.
Nikki. Well, I wonder if you could put Nikki in touch with the group, the Paul Bartle's group, working on families and households for the report we're writing in the autumn. Because that's Paul Bartle, Bishop Durham, is leading a commission on families and households. And that's exactly the kind of evidence that they're needing. And when the report comes out in, I think it's October that time, I hope it will include it is aimed at saying to government and regulatory department, many people here, local government, here's some ideas, practical and affordable ideas for tackling this sort of thing, which puts so many, the family is the basic building block of society, and the family and household in its modern form. And if we don't support them, we may as well not give up. The family and household predates countries, societies, everything.
I hope to Lloyd's already on it.
Well, Mark, he's in Madeira
Is he now? Oh, I say. Martin Lloyd heads up the charity.
I must say that now we're in Lewes. The organisation helps us every year to have children, disgruntled children to come to the town hall. These are children who normally won't come to the town hall, but they do. And you kindly, for these children to meet the mayor and have lunch with all of us.
Lucky mayor.
And they go home with
they go home
Christmas,
exactly.
exactly.
The mayor is very exciting.
And they go home, not only that, they go home with a Christmas present that they would normally. Maybe some of them
Oh, I think
get in their own
that
house. So,
is.
thank you so much.
Now that's community in action.
Exactly.
Absolutely.
And community is above all, go back to the question you asked. What I should have said, the other way in which we build community is partnerships.
Absolutely.
Because none of us can do it by ourselves. And the idea that we have to rely entirely on local government to do it is just a load of rubbish.
Yeah.
It can't be done. It has to be done by everyone doing their own role fully in the right way. And not just letting someone else shoulder the burden.
Well, as a charity, we get huge support from the diocese from many individuals.
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, personally, I'm in favour of cutting bishops' salaries.
That's not that later.
Sorry about that. Actually, I'm staying in his house tonight.
Yeah. Well, thank you all for turning out. A huge thank you to everybody who's provided everything for tonight and organised it.
Yes.
But just to thank you for being with us. And let's give a round of applause. Thank
You were very kind. Would people mind if I ended with a short prayer? I mean, if you think I'm talking fairies at the bottom of the garden in your particular position, that's fine. It's a sort of can't do any harm, might do some good situation. So let's pray. Bless, O Lord, this wonderful town of Lewes and its surrounding villages, these communities, this community of communities. Strengthen them to face the challenges of poverty, of change, of flex and yet stability. Give those who are on the council wisdom. And thank you for the work of so many that work here in councils, just doing the day-to-day stuff, without which we wouldn't have street lights or paving stones or whatever it happens to be. Guard them and let them know the joy of the service they do. May the blessing of God Almighty, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit rest upon you, on those you love, and all this time, now and always. Amen. Just the last thing to say thank you to our councillors and county councillors. One of the things in travelling around the world, a huge amount I notice, and it took me ages to see why, is so many lovely places where there are no local resources, local government doesn't really work. And one of the reasons for that is, is what you do. You sit at a local town council and someone says, why is the street light on, Churchill Street, the third one along, why is that not working? And actually, when I was chaplain to the mayor in Southern when I was rector, I used to sit there thinking, and then the penny dropped that if that didn't happen there, it wouldn't happen at all. So thank you.